One way or another, you popped out. Of course, at that time, always
Yes.
compared to Joan Baez, but...
Well, compared to everybody in folk music.
Yeah, but how does one survive at that? You were scarcely in your 20s. There must have been a big media hype. You're suddenly a culture
Oh,
folk...
no, there wasn't, really, until the moment came when I was on the cover of Life magazine. But media hype there never was. I very gradually and very slowly began to build a following. When I started in Boulder in Colorado, there was the Colorado following, and then I moved. I worked in Central City at the Gilded Garter one summer. That was a scream. And it's a wonder I didn't get sidetracked. At that point, I was holding two jobs. I was working a day job in a sort of cafeteria. I was a good cook. I still cook occasionally, not often, because I don't eat as much as I used to. But I had two jobs then. I was just a demon for work, I can't tell you. Then I moved east and I began singing in clubs here in New York and around the country. And it would always take a hospitalization to slow me down.
Really?
I mean, I had polio when I was a kid, when I was 11. And I have had these incidents in my life where somebody said, wait a minute, just hold everything.
You also managed tuberculosis somewhere.
Yes, I did. I remember what happened. I flew to a place in Tucson. I flew from Connecticut to Tucson in the morning. I got there in the afternoon, and I was very sick. By the way, my lungs had been gurgling for a long time, but I thought I had some minor kind of...
You had a gurgle
in my side. I had developed this new sound in my voice. And the people who had the club, who managed this folk club that I was singing in, happened to be biologists who worked for a doctor. And they said, you know, you're sick. And I didn't think they were referring to my material. And I went to the doctor the next morning, put me in the hospital. So there have always been those times. But it was a slow and a gradual building of my career. And it wasn't until 10 years after I had started, 9 years after I'd started working, that I had a big record with Both Sides Now.
In fact, in those early years, a criticism that I read over and over, that Judy Collins seems somewhat distant, a bit haughty, a little bit icy.
Oh, really? I was scared to death, actually. It's nice to know that changes. In the past few years, it's been a very different experience for me.
But these early years now, at one point, you totally went in another direction when you left the classical piano. You described now playing in clubs, and suddenly you've got an infant son. We've got to get in there, right?
That's right.
And then again, you change totally directions. You divorce, you leave your husband, and you go to New York City. How do you make those kind of decisions? Most of us...
Well, it wasn't sudden, you know. It happened over a period of years, and...
How old were you?
It wasn't easy.
How old were you when you showed up in New York with...
22, I guess.
And did you know anything?
No, I didn't even know how to get from the village to the main part of the city. I didn't know there was a main part of the city. Do you know where I was staying? I was staying in the Broadway Central Hotel and working in Gertie's, and then when my 2 weeks was finished, I would go home to Connecticut. So I didn't know that there was a New York City. I was extremely damp behind the ears and very naive. But, you know, I've always been protected. It's interesting. Some way or other, I've always had angels watching over me. And I think that the song that is on my new album, called Angel on My Side, is very true. There's always been some force that's been around me in a very protective way. This is a rough business to be in, as you know. And even though folk music had a very pure image in those days, entertainment in itself is a tough business, and I've had a lot of very good fortune. I've gotten with the right people. I had the good luck to move in next door to my teacher in 1965, who is still my teacher today. And I've had a lot of good fortune and a lot of good friends who helped me to find out where the center of New York was.
I was quite surprised, I think, when I started researching, reading. You lost your son for nearly 5 years.
Yes, I did.
Age 4 to about 9?
Yes.
How'd you go through that? What happened on that? You were a folk singer.
Well, it was a long period of...
Was that a bit disreputable to be at that point? I mean, how does one...
Very disreputable.
You're singing in the village. Set the scene now.
Especially, here I am. I have a child who's 3. It started long before I lost the custody battle. It simply went on and on and on and on and on. And I was getting divorced, and I was moving into New York City. I had an apartment in the village. Very unpopular with the family court in Rockland, Connecticut. As I look back on it now...
You mean this folk singer living in the village wasn't fit to have a child?
Of course. I think now, as I look back, that in some ways it was quite an enlightened decision by the judge, because it was not popular to put a child in the custody of the father in those days.
And the father was a teacher?
Yes.
So that stable...
Very stable.
Okay.
Still is.
And here you are. You're probably with a psychiatrist by now.
Oh, absolutely. That had, I think, something to do with my losing the custody. Anyway, it was really a scene up there. It was a soap opera in that court, I'm going to tell you, with my husband's family and all of their marshaled efforts and me and my little lawyer who came up from New York.
Did he have a beard?
No, he did not. He was extremely proper looking, in a 3-piece suit and everything. And I bought a dress for the proceedings. I never wore a dress in those days. Anyway, the result was that after a few years, my son came back to live with me. And he's 23 now, and it seems like that it's gone. It's very hard to imagine. It's funny, isn't it, that as we mature, the things that happen to us seem so close. It's hard to account for the time that goes by. However, it is my experience that what you put out, you get back. And somehow in the long run that comes to you.
Mid-70s, you were saying publicly your life was in a shambles.
Yeah, it wasn't so easy. But those are transitions that people go through, too, and that is not out of the ordinary. It's not uncommon.
Oh, you were approaching 40.
Exactly. And that has a lot to do with it.
What'd you think? What was that fear? When I get to be 40, I fall off the edge?
When I was growing up, there wasn't anybody over 40 who wasn't old. None of our parents were young, youthful people in those days because their images of themselves were very different. And rightly so. There was an actuarial table that told you that at a certain point, that's it. On the other hand, I had a lot of examples in my life that told me that you could live well and do what you wanted to do forever. So there was a real contradiction there. I don't think I feared turning 40, but what happened to me was that about the age of 31 or 2, my whole physical, I told you I have a delicate nature and I've had some diseases over the years. And when I was growing up, I did not have a sense of my body at all. I wasn't athletic. I was smoking like a fiend. I couldn't breathe. I had just no resources physically. And for some reason, a little light went off, and I said, I have to quit smoking, and I have to start doing something for myself. And progressively then, I think from that point, I've gotten healthier so that today I eat right, I take care of my body. I love myself physically. I never did. That was an entirely different person living back there in those earlier years. And I think it's extraordinary that can happen. I think that's really amazing.
How did you fend off, or did you feel that your public was becoming part of your life, looking into the private world of Judy Collins, which you described as being in a shambles, incidentally? I mean, what did you do?
Well, I had a bust-up of a romance, which was really, that in that critical time, that was very much a part of what was going on with me. But those aren't things you talk about, I think, for me, when you go through them. They happen to be easier to deal with in retrospect than they are when they're happening. When they're happening, you do your work. You get yourself together, and you go out, and you do it. And you keep doing tours, and you keep, you know, doing your work. That's really what saves me, and I think a lot of people. The passion that it takes to love something and to do it as your life work is a very great salvation, and has gotten me through a lot of very sticky times.
Is the work more valuable than say, the relationship? Would you marry again, or would that be in the way of the work?
I don't know if that's a question that's relevant. I don't think marriage for me is appropriate. I was quoted somewhere, and I think I did say it, that if my accountant told me that I should get married for financial reasons, and if I were in a situation where it made sense, it might make sense. I have a very good relationship with a man that I love very much, and that's very ongoing and part of my life. His work, and he's a professional, is not more important than the relationship. I don't know if that's a question that is asked of men, is it? Or is it only a question that's asked of women? I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate to say to a man, now, is your work really more important than your relationship, right? But it seems to me that's a question that's been asked of me, and all I can say is I get equal time.
Judy Collins, thank you for being with us.
The Swiss Alps are at their peak for the hottest concert of the year. A super lineup of today's biggest pop stars are warming up for Montreux Rock. Next.